Anyway, what I was going to say was I had the pleasure of meeting Vince Palamara at a conference a couple years ago. And the name Vince Palamara is synonymous with study of the Secret Service agents and the Secret Service. And I asked him how he got interested in that. And he said he had a conversation with Penn Jones Jr. and he was trying to figure out how he could contribute to the overall JFK assassination. And the advice that Penn Jones Jr. gave him, he said, pick a topic and study the hell out of it. And I think you'd agree if you know Vince, he has done just that. So now I'll give you his bio. Vince Palamara is the leading Secret Service expert and an authority on the Kennedy assassination as well. He's written 5 books to critical acclaim, the best-selling Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service, and The Failure to Protect President Kennedy, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, The Not-So-Secret Service, Who's Who in the Secret Service, and Honest Answers about the murder of President John F. Kennedy, a new look at the JFK assassination. Palamara has appeared on C-SPAN, including DVD, the History Channel for the Men Who Killed Kennedy, Newsmax, National Geographic Channel, and on the documentaries A Coup in Camelot, The Assassination of JFK, and The Man Behind the Suit. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome and your full attention to Vince Palamara.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate being here. Even if it's remote, appreciate your attention. I just want to say, obviously today is November 19th. Yesterday was the anniversary of the last time President Kennedy received good security. As we know, on November 22nd, President Kennedy received arguably the worst security he could receive. But on November 18th, when he traveled to Tampa, Florida, the security was very good indeed, especially for the time. We always got to remember the context of the times. This was before the age of terrorism, and the average, threat was either from a pistol, rifle, maybe a Thompson submachine gun, and there was grenade threats in years past to various foreign dignitaries and whatnot. But by and large, for the time, thinking about the security from basically FDR to JFK was very well indeed. So again, yesterday being the anniversary of the best security ever received, I thought it would be appropriate to start out with security and procedural differences between Tampa and Dallas. Again, just 4 short days before the Dallas trip. Okay, first, and I'll go into more detail, just wanted to lay this out first. Secret Service agents were on the rear of the limo in Tampa, but not in Dallas. Military aid was in the front seat between the driver and the agent in charge of the trip in Tampa. That military aid was asked for the first time not to ride there in Dallas. Press photographer's flatbed truck rode in front of the limo in Tampa. It was canceled at the last minute in Dallas. Tom Diller, the Dallas Morning News, and others were really was something of much concern to them because they literally put them out of the picture, and they couldn't see anything when, obviously when the assassination occurred. There was no professional, films and photos other than James Alkins, who was there, and that was almost kind of a fluke because he was, wasn't able to get onto the underpass of the knoll itself. Okay, the motorcade was moving at a much higher rate of speed in Tampa than in Dallas, and Dallas was basically crawling. But in Tampa, even with agents on the limousine and whatnot, it was going at a very nice clip indeed. Normally, the special agent in charge, Gerald Bain, or I should say, his immediate assistant, Floyd Boring, accompanied Kennedy on all motorcades, all trips outside of Washington, D.C. Only Boring was in Tampa, no Bain, and neither of these gentlemen were in Dallas. I always equate Dallas to like the Super Bowl because JFK was warned not to go to Dallas. It was like rabid right-wing country, especially at the time. People thought about the John Birch Society, the Wanted for Treason posters, and it'd be the equivalent of, we're going to bench our starter Tom Brady and have the third stringer off the bench, which was Roy Kellerman. He was the third in charge. Okay. Here's a big discovery of mine not too long ago, something that I think a lot of people thought only occurred because of the assassination. But multi-story building rooftops were guarded in Tampa, but the many windows and rooftops were left unguarded in Dallas. The interesting thing about the motorcade in Tampa was it was JFK's longest domestic motorcade. It was about 28 miles long. Only the foreign trip to Germany was a longer motorcade. It was like 31 miles. But 28 miles, the Dallas trip was like about between 10 and 11 miles. And again, they had the resources in Tampa for 28 miles to guard multi-story building rooftops. This is verified not only by interviews with Secret Service agents, is verified by an interview I had with the lead Tampa motorcycle officer, Russell Groover. And it was also verified, surprisingly, with the Secret Service documents that came out in the late 1990s, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board. It was the Tampa Final Survey Report. Again, official Secret Service document. And in there, it says about building rooftops will be secured by the Sheriff's Department during the motorcade. When I spoke to Russell Groover, he confirms, says, oh, every multi-story building had heavily armed military or the Sheriff's Department there, and they were ordered to watch the crowds, watch the windows, and they did not give up their positions until the president safely passed their perimeter. So 28 miles of this. So again, you know, even if there's a small minority of people out there that think that Oswald did it, okay, you can have your little Oswald did it just for this hypothetical. If they would have been guarding multi-story building rooftops in Dealey Plaza, I think the assassination would have been aborted. That's putting it mildly. But again, back to Russell Groover briefly. Yeah, he was adamant about it. That's the reason why President Kennedy survived Tampa, and he was aghast when he found out that the buildings, rooftops why weren't my brethren in, you know, Texas, why weren't they doing the same thing we were doing? And, you know, it just crazy because it was a shorter motorcade. And for what it's worth, San Antonio, the day before Dallas, had a police helicopter and they were filming the motorcade. And there's a brief clip of that on the 2013 National Geographic documentary, JFK, The Final Hours. Ironically, part of the clip is narrated by Clint Hill. I guess he didn't realize the irony of it, but you could see clearly the presidential limousine and the following cars. It's a beautiful color film, and again, from a police helicopter filming. And also that morning, this is verified by Secret Service agent Mike Howard, building rooftops were guarded in Fort Worth. He gave an extensive interview a few years ago. It's on my YouTube channel as well. And he talks about, yeah, we guarded building rooftops. In fact, we used every resource we could. We even used Boy Scout troops. We used all the military, all the police we had. So there you go. Multiple motorcycles were used in a wedge formation running next to JFK in Tampa. So they closed the entire perimeter of the limousine with multiple motorcycles, and up to and including San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth. They get to Dallas, and quoting the House Select Committee, the formation is uniquely insecure. A measly 4 motorcycles. They had more slated the night before, but it was canceled, changed. And to add insult to injury, the motorcycles they did use were put behind the rear wheels, which was a totally useless formation, opened up Kennedy to a field of fire. At the very least, those motorcycle officers would have been more professional eye-near witnesses. They were armed with at least pistols, if not like a shotgun here and there. But the point is, it would have been more people to obscure the president as well. Okay. Now, the official White House photographer, Cecil Stoughton, rode in the Secret Service fob car in Tampa. He wasn't there in Dallas. I spoke to him twice and he never gave me a reason. He evaded. I asked him point blank, why weren't you there in the fob car as you were in Tampa? In fact, there's beautiful color photos of him feet away taking photographs of the presidential limousine. You see President Kennedy, everybody really good, and he never answered me. So I don't know why, but he wasn't there. Presidential Press Secretary Pierre Salinger accompanied JFK to Tampa, but not to Dallas. Salinger admitted in a book he wrote in 1997 that he missed only 1 or 2 trips during the entire Kennedy administration. One of them was the Texas trip. Pretty interesting. And speaking of third stringers like Roy Kellerman, we had a third stringer in Malcolm Kilduff. This was his first major trip on his own. It was his debut, as Agent Sam Kinney told me. And some people might say, well, that's interesting, but what kind of bearing does that have? Well, Pierre Salinger, as Agent Robert Lilly told me, was a veteran of many motorcades, planning and whatnot. And he would have saw things weren't correct. He probably would have questioned things, but you had a third stringer there who didn't know anything. He was green to the job, ironically, the day Kennedy's killed. You know, And there you have it. Just more people that weren't in position that should have been. The president's personal physician, Dr. George Berkeley, rode in close proximity to JFK in Tampa. He protested vigorously his separation from the motorcade, put way in the rear of the motorcade. In fact, Evelyn Lincoln, Kennedy's secretary, also was a witness to this and also added in that Dr. Berkeley protested vehemently in Love Field. He should have been next to Kennedy. This is another very interesting discovery. Part of it's more discovery. I think most people knew that Glenn Bennett rode the follow-up car, Agent Glenn Bennett. He made a pretty important observation about Kennedy being hit in the back. Well, he was a protective research section agent, or PRS. And what those agents did was monitor threats to the life of the president. It's a desk job in Washington. You look through the files, the cards, the Rolodexes and everything to see if any kind of threats are made to any president whenever they're visiting an advance team. They'll look and see if there's anybody, in Philadelphia, Cleveland, Paris, France, Italy. You just name the country or the city and they have index cards of threats. Well, he's riding in the follow-up car. Now, November 9th, Joseph Miltier makes his infamous boasting threat that Kennedy's going to be killed by a high-powered rifle from an office building. They're going to pick up somebody afterwards to throw the public off. That's November 9th. Glenn Bennett joins the White House detail on a temporary basis the next day. This is by Secret Service agent Wynn Lawson in planning documents. Okay. Well, Glenn Bennett is on the New York trip, the Florida trip, and the Texas trip. He's riding in every motorcade in the follow-up car. Pretty amazing, important duty for an agent who was in a desk job. Well, this is amazing. When he spoke to the House Select Committee in 1978, these documents only came out in 1996, he lied and said, I wasn't on the Florida trip. And he didn't volunteer anything about the New York trip. He was sitting next to Secret Service General Counsel Edward Meehan, because I think he realized that, this could be, they're probably going to discover that, sir, we have documents that show Elsa photographs. Now I know what Glenn Bennett looks like. It took many years to even figure out what who some of these people were. But just the very important point is he was on, again, can't stress this enough, he was on the Florida, New York, and Texas trips. He just joins the White House detail temporarily. He's in all the motorcades, all on the follow-up car, and he lies to the House Select Committee and says point blank, I was not on the Florida trip, when he was on every single stop, Palm Beach, Cape Canaveral, Miami, Tampa, and he volunteers nothing about New York. Okay, well, if that isn't enough, fellow PRS agent Howard Norton was on at least part of the Florida trip, maybe the whole thing, just the planning documents that came out in late 1990 show him in Tampa. And he was on JFK's proposed trip to Austin. He was waiting for Kennedy when Kennedy was killed. Now, the interesting thing about that is that Secret Service agents and officials made it pretty plain to investigators that, well, protective research agents, those kind of intelligence agents weren't on planning of motorcades. That didn't happen until after the assassination. Well, what were they doing there before the assassination? If little old Lee Harvey Oswald did this, there was no conspiracy, no major threats to Kennedy, whatnot. Why were threat protective type of agents there? Interestingly, Clint Hill, in his book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, there's only a few pages on the assassination, but he confirms that Glenn Bennett was handling intelligence. When that little passage in his book, I almost fell over. Like, I cannot believe, does Clint Hill realize the ramifications of what he's saying? He's confirming my research. It only came out in 2012 in his book. Yep, Glenn Bennett handling research, so handling protective intelligence. Well, military and police line the streets and face the crowds in Tampa. Okay, yet when Kennedy comes to Dallas, there's no military. Okay, and the police are facing the motorcade, the few that are there. That's useless. They're supposed to be facing the crowds to see if there's any threats. Hello, yet they're facing the motorcade. Okay, so that's a basic overview. So you can just see right there in a nutshell, the differences between Tampa and Texas in general and Dallas in particular are pretty large. Well, in conjunction with some of the other things I was talking about, the big thing about the agents being on the limousine, on or near the rear limousine, they weren't always there. They were there quite a bit, but not always. The thing is, President Kennedy had nothing to do with that. And when I interviewed the special agent in charge of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, September 27, 1992 is a day will live in infamy with me, because up to that time, I was starting to think, well, maybe even though the security was lax, in Dallas, maybe Kennedy did not want certain things and whatnot. So again, this is the number one agent in the White House detail, Gerald Bain, BEHN, spoke to him. And I said, Mr. Bain, I started out thinking, well, it was true because I read Bill, Jim Bishop's book, Warring Manchester, the Warren Report must be true. And he said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. And I just remember getting caught mouthed. I just could not believe what I'm hearing. I mean, the man was only in his early 70s at the time, appeared quite lucid. He answered everything else in glorious detail. He's part of the White House detail from FDR to LBJ, number one agent for Kennedy, and also briefly did Johnson the first year or so. But I said to myself, well, you got to think like a defense attorney. Someone else is going to say out there, well, Vince, how do we know this is a senile old man? Maybe he was mistaken, even though he was the number one agent. So lo and behold, through the days, weeks, months, and years after, actually decades, when I spoke to or corresponded to many of his colleagues, it's like they were reading cue cards. They are all conveying the same thing to me. They were saying that President Kennedy, always a very nice man, very cooperative, never interfered with our actions at all, never ordered us off the back of the car. And, if anybody else is thinking maybe it was Kenny O'Donnell, the White House staff, you can nix that too. They said the same thing. The staff is very cooperative. In fact, Floyd Boring, the number two agent of the White House detail, joined Gerald Bain to say that Kennedy never ordered him off the back of the car. He did a 1976 JFK Library oral history that only came out in 1999, thanks to yours truly and Bill Adams, a researcher from California. And in there, it says that of all the administrations he served, which was FDR through LBJ, the Kennedy administration was the most cooperative. Him and his staff were just a joy to work with. So there was nothing in there about, ordering agents off the car. He said they were very cooperative, and the staff as well. And Gerald Bain said the same thing basically in his oral history. He wasn't as forceful, but he just said the staff was, didn't cause any problems and whatnot. But again, a lot of this information like came out piecemeal because little old me was out in the wilderness asking these questions. Most people bought hook, line, and sinker to the Warren Report. Kennedy's not around to defend themselves. They think, well, that makes sense. He's the president of the United States. Who are these little peon agents? If he tells them what to do, they're going to do it. Well, that's not true. President Harry Truman was kind of famous for saying, he said that the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States really had. And this was echoed by Lyndon Johnson and President Clinton decades later. Well, turns out a week before the assassination, November 15th, 1963, an Associated Press story said the Secret Service can overrule even the president where his personal security is involved. And there's just loads of corroboration for that. That's why I wrote my books, 5 of my books. And the first book was Survivor's Guilt, specifically focusing on the Secret Service. And amazingly, Clint Hill, when he did an oral history to the 6th floor museum, you can order it out there from the museum. He said something that just blew me away. He said that, well, the president could tell you what he wants done. He could tell you certain things. That doesn't mean you have to do it. And what we always used to do was always agree with the president, and then we do what we felt was best anyway. So there you go. I guess Clint Hill, he had a moment. He was thinking about the future, and it's one thing to write these books and, make these allegations that President Kennedy was reckless with his security and orders off the car. But here's Clint Hill totally contradicting it. And again, 3 U.S. presidents came out and said the Secret Service was the only boss they had. There's numerous articles. Chief Huey Bauman, who was the first chief of the Secret Service, said the same thing. That the president knew that I could overrule anything he had to say regarding security. The Secret Service, by law, has that, even though they're technically subservient to the president. When it comes to security, they are not. They are the number one people when it comes to security. So even if hypothetically, just as an example, President Kennedy did say, hey, guys, get off the back of the car, which he didn't, they would overrule him and say, yeah, sir. And they would do what he felt was best anyway. And the thing is, you got to keep in mind is, as several other agents told me, oh, the president was the leader of the free world. He had better things to think about than with his bad back, trying to turn around and see, I wonder if Joe Jones is back there, and I don't like this. And this whole thing about the agents obscuring Kennedy from the crowd, total bull. There was plenty of room to see the president. Crowds from FDR through and including JFK never had a problem seeing the president. You could see still photos and newsreel clips of FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy from 61 to 63. Many times the agents were on the car or near the car. He's smiling. The people could see him. They're all looking at him. So that's all bunk. But what it is just like they say, Kennedy was reckless in his private life. They also added this myth that he was reckless of his security. This thing about I have a rendezvous with death. Hello, we all have a rendezvous with death. None of us are immortal here, but it made for cute tabloid fodder after his death. Like, President Kennedy, he was reckless. So I guess he was reckless of security. It just kind of fit a nice little trope, that President Kennedy was reckless and whatnot. And I touched on this before about the motorcycles. Normally 4 to 6, well, basically, I should say 3 to 6 normally on each side of the limousine prior to Texas stops. Again, Florida, Germany, Paris, France. Sometimes there was up to a dozen on each side. And again, we're supposed to believe that Kennedy didn't like the sound of the noise beside him, and the motorcycles were told not to be there in Dallas. How convenient. But they're there up to and including, the day before, in the morning, even in Florida, or I'm sorry, in Fort Worth, you could see the motorcycles beside him. He doesn't have a care in the world. These were Secret Service procedures and implementations, and only the local police was subservient to the Secret Service. So if there was any deficiencies on the police, it began with the Secret Service. And again, to their credit, the House Select Committee said that this situation with the motorcycles was uniquely insecure. They noticed the pattern too, because they were wondering, well, what's going on here? Why was he, allotted so few motorcycles? In fact, when you see the Zapruder film, especially when the shooting begins, there's no one around, no motorcycles, no agents, no nothing. Okay, and I touched on this before. This was a major discovery of mine about the building, multi-story building rooftops. I also believe that, that was only as a result of assassination. They started to, guard building rooftops because the assassination taught them a huge lesson in a bad way that we got to protect presidents better. But again, I have newspaper clippings. It's in my books. They were printed from the FDR days that spectators were ordered cleared of all building rooftops during the Truman days. Talks about how thousands, there's one, I think it's like 3,000 police guard building rooftops. Eisenhower, same thing. I have articles reprinted in my books and on my websites, YouTube channel videos about how, Eisenhower police guarded building rooftops. And most importantly, JFK, 61 through 63, many trips. And here's the other thing too. Sometimes, every once in a while, whether they're just being cute or they actually think there's something to it, someone will send me like a still photo. They'll say like, well, like President Kennedy's trip to Nashville. Hey, Vince, can you explain this, sir? President Kennedy looks pretty much a sitting duck to me in his Nashville motorcade. The only bad thing is that building rooftops were guarded. So Kennedy didn't always have overt security, like tons of motorcycles or agents on the back of the car, or the bubble top, and high speed. Didn't always have all those elements, but what he did have was building rooftops being guarded. So they could scan the rooftops that they were on. They could scan the windows. They could scan down below. You had plainclothes police in the crowds. You had the police facing the crowds. You had the military also augmenting the crowd. So that's the reason why. There's a reason why presidents lived before Dallas. It wasn't just rubbing rabbit's foot and hindsight's 2020 and more Monday morning quarterbacking and come on, there's reasons why, and these are the reasons, and you got to put everything into context of the time. For today, 2022, that kind of security wouldn't wash because we're in the age of terrorism, very high power assault weapons. The list goes on. There's powerful groups, overseas and even in America that would wish the president ill. It was a different time. Again, we're talking pistols, Thompson submachine guns, rifles, things of that nature. So you got to keep that in mind. But there's a reason why presidents were protected. Here's a really amazing discovery as well. And it's always just because of the advent of technology. Most people think, well, the president didn't want the bubble top on. He didn't like that. And he only used it every once in a while. Wrong answer. You can thank digital technology. It's only been since roughly 2007 on that so many films and photos have been remastered and, more importantly, released to begin with. If you looked on the internet or you searched the JFK library before 2007, not that long ago, 15 years ago, there was a real small amount of motorcade films and photos, mainly on the inauguration, mainly on the Dallas motorcade, and very little in between. Well, since then, there has been a flood of them. And it's been very surprising because it turns out, and it took years to compile these things, President Kennedy used the bubble top in some semblance or another, either partial or full configuration, on between a third and 2/3 of all his motorcades. Mainly in good weather. He's smiling up a storm, the bubble top's on, everyone can see him. This whole myth about he didn't like it and only use that if it's pouring down rain and all this other stuff. It's all after the fact. When the man's dead and can't defend himself, they threw this on him. Nothing to do with it. Sam Kinney was the agent who drove the follow-up car in Dallas. He was adamant to me on 3 different occasions I spoke to him that he, Sam, was solely responsible for the bubble top's removal, had nothing to do with Kennedy. Kennedy never ordered it. Kenny O'Donnell had nothing to do with it. The list goes on. Sam Kane said, it's one of my, he said at the time, because the early 90s, it's one of my 30-year regrets if I should have put the bubble top on, but I decided not to. The bubble top originally was on the car and he took it off because there was a Mr. Rain. And so again, not to contradict myself, obviously sometimes the bubble top was on due to inclement weather, and I don't include those in my tally. I'm strictly talking about good weather conditions. In fact, Bob Lilly, agent of the White House detail for most of Kennedy's administration, told me, and I saw films and photos later, that, oh yeah, Roy Kellerman and I rode on the back of a car when Kennedy tripped to South America. We went to Puerto Rico and several other stops, and we were reaching speeds of 50 miles an hour with that bubble top on. And we were sweating up a storm. There was no rain, no nothing. So again, that just dispels this whole myth and this whole thing of blaming Kennedy for security. And again, it's only through the advent of technology and time that a lot of films and photos have come forward to show, wow, Kennedy used the bubble top a heck of a lot more than we thought. And again, the list goes on. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have videos, a lot of recent ones, just from the last year, of bubble top compilations of motorcades. And again, all these other security procedures about proof that the rooftops were guarded, agents on the back of the car many times. So you can see this for yourself. In fact, it used to be a cute saying, I think it's the Who drummer Keith Moon said something to the effect that people will remember your entrances and your exits, and everything in the middle doesn't mean a damn thing. And that applied for many years to the Kennedy case. If you saw documentaries up to even recently, to a certain extent, you would see the inaugural, maybe the jacking him in the open motorcade in the winter, and you'd see the same old footage of Kennedy and Dallas and very little in between. And that lack of knowledge, from the films and photos, stoked those fires of people blaming Kennedy and looking at it and say, oh, see, he was reckless. He didn't have the bubble top on. And I heard he didn't like it. And it's all bull. It's just all after the fact, blaming the man. But there you go. Press photographers, like I said before, normally rode in front of the limousine. Yeah, there's usually 1 to 2 flatbed trucks of still and motion photographers. So you had all these professional eye and ear witnesses taking still and motion photography. And sometimes there was even a live television feed. In fact, it's on my channel as well. Does anybody sees that San Diego video of June, I think it's June 6th, 1963. And actually, it's comical. Some people, like David Von Peen and that, try to say, well, look, Kennedy was a sitting duck in this motorcade. Meantime, the narrator's even saying that the Marines are lying the street facing the crowd, which you could see every 5 feet, there's a Marine. You could see, oh my God, there's Marines on both sides of the street, okay? There's 2 flatbed trucks and they're filming live, okay, for the television viewing audience. Gerald Bain's on the trip. There's motorcycles beside the car, and they're also real close to the spectators, acting as a wedge to the security. And you had the building rooftops guarded. So no wonder Kennedy at that time, intermittently stood in the car and it was open car, didn't always have the bubble top on, but you had these other security measures that were there. And again, it's only through many years of research and contacting these gentlemen and, the documents released. The Assassination Records Review Board was a tremendous resource for the Secret Service shift reports, the final survey reports, and many other documents, because before then it was a guessing game. It used to be theorizing. I have a theory. What's your theory? And I don't believe that, Vincent, or whatever. And it'd just be an argument, go nowhere, because neither side had any proof of anything. Well, now we do. Touched this before, because obviously, Floyd Boring, the number 2 agent, was in Tampa. Well, Bain and or Boring, the 2 top agents, normally accompanied JFK on trips outside of Washington, D.C., and obviously many motorcades in Washington, D.C., ceremony and whatnot. Okay. Well, he gets to Dallas, he gets the Texas trip, I should say. And Roy Kellerman, again, it's the analogy. We got the Super Bowl, and hey, sit Tom Brady. What's the third stringer's name? Joe Jones? Hey, come on, higher. Let's see what you got, pal. And that's basically what it was. And again, you had Senator William Fulbright, Evelyn Lincoln, other people warned Kennedy. Even Kennedy said, this is a quote from Kennedy, we're heading to nut country now. And there's the right-wing rabid John Birch Society, the wanted for treason posters. It'd be the equivalent of President Obama going to Mississippi. Oh, sir, there's no threats here. And you believe that? I got a bridge to sell you. And yet Kennedy is going to Texas and there's no threats. Roy Kellerman even testified to the Warren Commission. It was unusual. They found no threats. Abraham Bolden, when I spoke to him several times, many times actually, he said that was highly unusual. He could not fathom how they didn't find one person to wish Kennedy ill. How convenient. Another reason why they could have stripped security. Hey, we didn't find anything, so why have special precautions? Or I should say normal precautions. Speaking of which, not to jump ahead, but Roy Kellerman, when he spoke to Cyber and O'Neill, the FBI, he said the security measures, the advanced security measures for Dallas were the most stringent and thorough ever invoked for a president of the United States. What a blatant, disgusting lie. But it was a cover-up. Put that down. The FBI agents duly wrote that down in the report. It's out there. It's laughable. It's obscene. It's almost criminal to say something like that. It's the exact opposite. Security was horrible, and yet it's out there. He actually had the audacity to say something like that. Secret Service knew of prior threats. Speaking of threats, in fact, I have it on my Facebook channel, Facebook site, I should say. I have it on my YouTube channel. Many newspaper articles of groups or individuals threatening Kennedy from 61 to 63. In fact, his security was augmented down in Palm Beach, Florida, because an anti-Castro Cuban group had threatened Kennedy 2 years before the assassination occurred. These are all public domain articles. I had to join newspaper.com, spend like $100 or so to get these prints, but I put them all in my books and, online and whatnot. You could see, wow, okay, Kennedy was threatening all these trips in foreign countries and whatnot. So the Secret Service knew to guard Kennedy, yet they're supposedly all these poor men. They didn't know what they were doing. It happened so fast. And, Kennedy didn't want us there. This whole mythology. I was so mad when Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill came out with their books. And again, this is not ego. I'm just a little nobody out here. I'm done trying to say I'm like delusions of grandeur. But Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill wrote their books because of my research. I know that for 100% fact. In the interest of time, I'll make this very brief. I sent Clint Hill 22-page certified receipt requested letter in 2005. He was long retired, had no compunction to ever write a book. Gerald Blaine, not Bain, but Blaine, B-L-A-I-N-E, was a nobody agent no one heard of, okay? Sent this letter to him, and it was a Cliff Notes version of my research. And to say they were livid is an understatement. Okay, Clint Hill, when I spoke to him, said, I have no interest in talking to you whatsoever. And I was trying to ask him questions about my letter. Was very bold at the time, but what can you do? And I only got his unlisted address and number. He was not available to journalists back in the days before he knew Lisa McCubbin and wrote books. Only Mike Wallace's 60 Minutes and William Manchester spoke to him, other than, the Warren Commission as well. So those three entities. That was it. No private research because he had an unlisted number. Well, Lynn Meredith in 2005 said, Vince, I could see from your letters to me that you're very interested in this. Here's Clint Hill's private address and phone number. Please don't harass him. Just be polite and whatnot. I couldn't believe it. Oh my God, it's like the Holy Grail. I got Clint Hill's address and phone number. So I did what I did, and a little harsh, but I did what I said. Hey, sir, a lot of your colleagues are telling me that President Kennedy never ordered him off the back of a car, and I listed all the security deficiencies. So then all of a sudden, hey, I'm seeing a little press blurb the same year. Gerald Blaine, a very obscure agent, is coming out with a book called The Kennedy Detail on Simon & Schuster, the #1 publisher in the country. Unknown agent. Only like somebody like me would know who Gerald Blaine was. 99.9% of the universe never heard of this guy. Only served for 5 years, obscure agent. Clint Hill, speaking of 2005, admitted on C-SPAN, after they spoke about me briefly for the second time, they brought my name up. He said he burned all his notes probably in 2005. I wonder why 2005 he chose to burn all his notes. Could it be that my letter freaked him and Gerald Blaine out, and they're burning notes, covering stories, writing books? And Gerald Blaine's book is so obscene. He's blaming Kennedy for not being on the back of the car, and he supposedly had how obscene is this? They supposedly had a meeting the morning of JFK's funeral and said, look, everybody, even though he did, we can't blame President Kennedy, for his own death, even though he didn't want us on the back of the car. Came out as a 2010 book. All these men are dead, other than Gerald Blaine, a couple other people, and they're inventing dialogue. None of these guys, they weren't recorded. They weren't tape recorded. How do we know they really said this stuff? But Gerald Blaine is speaking for them in the book. Well, Talmadge Bailey, agent who briefly served in the White House detail, was in a Secret Service field office. He told me that meeting, expletive deleted, never existed. He confirmed there was no meeting. It was horse pucky. I'll keep it clean. And obviously I knew the same thing because Wynn Lawson, the lead advance agent for Dow's trip, he's supposedly part of this meeting, yet he's telling me that I never heard anything about Kennedy ordering the back of the car. There was no directive from Kennedy. I'm like, wait a minute. He's the lead advance agent. He's putting this in a letter to me. List goes on in the interest of time. But again, it was this little old me out in the wilderness doing this, interviewing these guys, contacting these guys, and they're telling me stuff going against official history. And we had Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill furiously writing these books. We had Gerald Blaine's attorney sent me a threatening letter before his book came out. They both go on C-SPAN. It's before my first book was published, keep in mind. They both came on C-SPAN twice talking about little old me, showing a YouTube video of me. CEO Brian Lamb of C-SPAN's talking about who's this young man, Vince Palamara, a graduate of Duquesne University. I showed this at a conference in 2019, by the way, the video clips. You can see it on my YouTube channel. It's all over the place. And yeah, and everyone's saying the same thing. Vince, thou protesteth too much. Why are they going on and on? And we'll go through this a little more. Okay, the motorcade route. This is pretty amazing. The motorcade route was changed in Dallas. And I know what you're thinking. I've heard that before. There's no proof the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. Wrong. Again, I spoke to the special agent in charge of the White House detail, Gerald Bain. Okay, #1 agent. I asked him about the motorcade route in Dallas and said, there's rumors it was changed. I don't know if it was. So he goes, I know it was changed, but why? I have forgotten completely. I don't know. Now, even if we think he's lying about he's forgotten, I don't know, but he says, I know it was changed. Gerald Bain, B-E-H-N, not to be confused with Gerald Blaine, did an executive session testimony under lock and key, so to speak, to the House Select Committee. Those have never been released. Yeah, the Assassination Records Review Board never released them. They're not at the National Archives. I don't know where they are. But Gerald Bain was put behind closed door session of the executive session of the House Select Committee. I think there's some other executive sessions that have never seen the light of day. And so he was in the know. Oh, that's how I'm leaving out a very crucial part. How it came about was, I said, were you ever contacted by the House Select Committee? He says, yeah. They asked me about the trip to Tampa, and they asked me why their motorcade route was changed in Dallas. Again, I know it was changed, but why? I've forgotten completely. Sam Kennedy, the agent who drove the fob car, had 3 really nice lengthy conversations with him. He said that there were indeed alternate routes, and one of them was Main to Industrial. In fact, the original plan was to go to Main to Industrial. And Chief George Lumpkin of the Dallas Police had something to do with it. He said to the House Select Committee, we didn't go that way because it was filled with winos and broken pavements. That's the reason why. Thing is, though, President Kennedy visited the streets of Harlem, okay, the slums of Harlem, of all due respect. No problem there. Hey, he's going through Harlem. He went through very poor, seedy sections of Costa Rica in March of '63. No problem there. In fact, Paul Landis on the Dallas Motorcade said, we passed through junkyards and used car dealers in this typical kind of neighborhood. So it wasn't always roses and beautiful scenery for the president, but he's going by at a fair clip. He's there to see all people, rich and poor, white and black, doesn't matter your color, your race, whatever. The point being is, this sole little excuse that was thrown in there by George Lumpkin, who I'm very suspicious of, you can see my first book, that was used as the cover, just like the bubble top. Kennedy didn't want the bubble top, end of story. And Kennedy didn't want the agents on the back of the car, end of story. Motorcade route, wouldn't go through Main Industrial because George Lumpkin said there was winos and broken pavement. But even Jerry Bruno, the Democratic National Committee advance man, said that if they would have been going straight to Main Street, they would have been going faster, further away from the book depository and further away from the grassy knoll. But they took them on this silly little jog, Maine to Houston and Houston to Elm, just to see a few more people. And then lo and behold, it's either Oswald or the grassy knoll or both. And, we all know what happened. That's why we're here. But this whole blaming Kennedy is obscene. The sheriff's department was told to stand down, as we infamously know from Roger Craig. Thank God that's on video from 1974. He said that Sheriff Bill Decker told him to stand out front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade. But Sheriff Decker to Forrest Sorrells the day before said he offered his full cooperation and would use all his available men if he needed. So he's telling Roger Craig something else, and you can see films and photos. It's a little blurry. You can see the sheriff's department stand there picking their nose and doing nothing. And the interesting thing about Forrest Sorrells is, even though my 3 major Secret Service suspects are Floyd Boring, who was the planner of the Texas trip, even though he wasn't there, he admitted to the Truman Library, the JFK Library, and to myself. And it's also in Jim Bishop's book, ironically. He was in charge of the advanced security during the Kennedy administration, and specifically the Texas trip. The Texas trip was in the capable hands of planner Floyd Boring, Jim Bishop said. Okay, and Emory Roberts, the agent in charge of the fob car in Dallas. The infamous clip of, and I discovered this in 1991, the grainy black and white video It's not so grainy now. There's better copies like on my YouTube channel. And you can see Don Lawton, Henry Ribka before he leaves the motorcade. And you can see Don Lawton walking with the car. And Emory Roberts stands up and motions him away. You can see it's in the Men Who Killed Kennedy, Coon Camelot, and Don Lawton 3 times raising his hands. Why? It's just the whole thing. And then Bill Greer, the driver of the president's limousine, for slowing down the car, looking back twice at Kennedy, denying he ever did this. And Bill Greer, his son, Bill Greer died in 1985. And his son, when I spoke to him, asked him twice during a lengthy phone conversation, what did your father think of President Kennedy? First time he ignored me, total silence, very awkward silence. So I went back to other things that he answered everything. Went back to, sir, yes, what did your father think of President Kennedy? He said, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. Bill Greer was born and raised in County Tyrone, Ireland, and only come to this country. Some reports say 18, some say 19, but the bottom line, people know for hundreds of years, the Protestants, the Catholics have literally had bloody wars. U2 wrote that song, Sunday, Bloody Sunday. It's all about the religious wars in Ireland. And his driver felt this way, his son. Why would he, the total stranger on the phone? He's answering everything else. And then after the first failed attempt, he says, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. Ironically, in the interest of time, to say that some of you might know, October 14th, 1963, everybody talks about the mysterious deaths. Well, it was the month before the assassination. Thomas B. Shipman, one of President Kennedy's drivers, died of a heart attack at Camp David. Now, this is after he passed his annual physical. I spoke to his family in the last 6-7 years, and they didn't throw any wet blankets on this. They didn't seek any remuneration, no money, no publicity, no nothing. They're just leading nice, obscure lives out there like millions of people. And they said that, yeah, we were very alarmed. He just passed his annual physical. He's fit as a fiddle, and he passes away at Camp David. And that gives Bill Greer the opportunity to be in there. And his daughter, Tom Shipman's daughter, told me that he was looking forward to the Dallas trip, Tom was, because we had relatives in Dallas. And, he just said that, in fact, his one grandson said, if my grandfather would have been driving the car, Kennedy would have lived. He would have knew what to do. And so you could say that's speculation and whatnot, but the bottom line is it's absolute fact. Everybody talks about all the mysterious deaths after. This is before. And this only came out in obscure articles. Interesting time. I discovered this in 1999. It was in a very obscure Xeroxed Kinko's kind of book called A Million Miles of Presidents by George McNally. He was a former agent who was head of the White House Signal Corps during Truman through early Nixon, I believe it was. But anyway, in the interest of time, there was a segment in his book, unindexed and whatnot, and his book was not available in bookstores. It says, Thomas Shipman, one of the president's drivers, died suddenly. I was like, who is Tom Shipman? What is this? And it took many years to uncover more and more details. I had to go through the newspaper archives. I got them all reprinted in my book. I got testimony and everyone. And what it boils down to is, yes, this agent died suddenly of a heart. The only person ever died at Camp David, the only agent during the Kennedy administration the month before. Okay. And the really strange thing is very hard to fathom. Kennedy, Salinger, no one spoke about the death of Thomas Shipman. No one mentioned it. It's not other than the newspaper articles in the Baltimore area, just briefly mentioned he passed away. Yet 10 years later, when an agent, Cliff Dietrich, died in a helicopter crash, President Nixon and his family attended the funeral and spoke at a press conference about one of his agents dying in a tragic helicopter accident. Yet 10 years before, Kennedy, even his detractors said he had a wonderful side, very caring, empathetic. I can't fathom it unless it was kept from him. I mean, Shipman died at Camp David. They didn't say anything. It was before the internet, for social media, for paparazzi, basically, tabloids for the most part. So I don't know. It was kept from him. They didn't say anything. The fact that he didn't say anything in Salinger, there's no press releases, no nothing. But there you have it. But the point I was trying to get to, although it's very important information to convey, was Forrest Sorrells. This is my latest book, Honest Answers, about the murder of President Kennedy. He's also a suspect as well, because he spoke vehemently against the Kennedy administration. A lady contacted the FBI office right after the assassination, in fact, several times, says that I know Mrs. Sorrells well. I know Mr. Sorrells. He should be removed from his position as head of the Dallas Secret Service office because he frequently spoke out against the Kennedy administration. And if that weren't enough, when the FBI sought out Sorrells before the assassination during the planning and said, do you need our assistance for anything? Forrest Sorrells said no. So he didn't want any FBI help on on the planning of the Texas troops? I call it the assassination, but at that time it was motorcade planning and whatnot. That's why James Hosty was having dinner as the motorcade passed by. There was nobody looking out for Oswald, nobody looking out for any threats, nobody. They were all stood down because, you know, there's four Sorrells, the head of the Dallas office. Oh, no, we don't need your help. And then this woman frantically contacting, and again, these reports are in my newest book. You can see them for yourselves. You can thank Harold Weisberg. They were buried in the Harold Weisberg archives. Yep, no one knew about it. There were no books, no nothing. It's shocking to see this. This woman's coming out and casting huge aspersions against Forrest Sorrells, basically saying he's a right-wing nut and he hates Kennedy's guts. And that's who's riding the lead car ahead of Kennedy's car. So it's amazing. He's surrounded by enemies, like I said. Now, again, I want to stress something. I do not believe the Secret Service as an organization had anything to do with this. 99% of these agents were squeaky clean and everything. It just comes down to a few bad apples invoking what they did, and, you know, there you go. So yeah, no problem. Thanks. Yeah, so and to head in the interest of time, a few more things here. I was talking about Emory Roberts. Yeah, one of the things about Emory Roberts was you know, he recalled agents Ribka and Reddy from the follow-up car during Dallas motorcade. When the shooting began, he ordered the agents not to move. I got this on audio tape too. What happened was Harry Livingstone, in his book High Treason, says that Emory Roberts ordered the agents not to move. And I thought, oh, he's talking about Reddy, right? This has got to be a gross overstatement. So I spoke to CM Kingsley. That's exactly right. I'm exactly right. What do you mean he ordered the agents not to move during the assassination? Well, they started hemming and hawing. Well, we thought that, you know, they couldn't have made the car at that point, and, you know, Emory was on to something. You know, we want the agents getting hurt. You know, like, wait a minute, you're there to protect the president. That's your goal, not if old me gets tripped up and hurt by the pavement or even gets run over. Another agent, modern agent, told me our safety doesn't mean anything. Like Clint Hill always boasts, I would have took a bullet for Kennedy. It would have been fine with me if I was shot. And yet the assassination begins, and Emory Roberts, who just recalled two agents at Love Field, orders the agents not to move. Incredible. And again, this is all backed by newspaper articles and whatnot. Emory Roberts effectively took over Dave Powers' position and became the appointment secretary to Lyndon Johnson while still a member of the Secret Service. In fact, there's newspaper articles I reprinted in a couple of my books. So the press is wondering, what's going on here? They're asking George Reedy, who was Lyndon Johnson's, like I said, press secretary, why is this agent, he's an active agent, by the way, why is he sitting where Dave Powers used to sit and greeting the ambassador of Japan? What is going on with this? And they were all mystified too. And in the history of the Secret Service, this has never happened, where an active agent also was working for an administration. How about Lyndon Johnson administration? And Emory Roberts, when he got to Parkland Hospital, he said to Roy Kellerman, who was his boss, you stay with Kennedy. We're going with Johnson. Kennedy wasn't declared dead yet. Your allegiance should have been with Kennedy at that time. Hello. Yet he was responsible, Roberts was, for taking over Air Force One. And he was beloved by Lyndon Johnson. When Lyndon Johnson, right before he left the presidency, he singled out Emory Roberts, said, Emory Roberts, he greets me every morning and says goodbye to me every night. Oh, isn't that sweet? So there you go. And again, it's all it takes. And then, you know, some people think, oh, it's only you conspiracy. And I'm talking about myself too. Oh, you conspiracy kooks believe there's a conspiracy. You can add a few Secret Service agents to the list. Abraham Bolden, Maurice Martineau, his boss in Chicago, who's a former White House veto agent, again, head of the Chicago office, was adamant to me there was a conspiracy. He wouldn't give me any details. He just knew there was more than one gunman involved, and he'd keep the details to himself. Pretty amazing, because a guy who guarded presidents from FDR to Nixon felt that way. C.M. Kennedy believed there was a conspiracy. In fact, he said the back of the president's head was blown out in Dallas, and he had that piece in the C-130 transport plane. Bill Greer and Roy Kellerman, Harold Weisberg said that his daughter, one of Roy Kellerman's daughters, came to him during a book signing, Harold Weisberg, and said, we hope the day would come when Mr. Greer and my father could say what they've said to us in private. Now, June Kellerman, Roy Kellerman's widow, Roy Kellerman died in 1984. June Kellerman's widow told me that he accepted that there was a conspiracy. And Bill Greer and Roy Kellerman did not believe the single bullet theory. Their descriptions of the wounds go against official history. They said the back of the head's gone. They're saying there was no exit for the back wound to even go through the neck wound. They were surprised about the single bullet theory. Roy Kellerman said there had to have been more than 3 shots, gentlemen, a flurry of shells coming to the car. Other agents who believe in conspiracy, Robert Bauch, Gerald O'Rourke. Gerald O'Rourke was on the Texas trip. John Norris, Democratic National Committee advancement, Marty Underwood, who advanced Kennedy's trip to Houston and his ill-fated trip that never happened to Austin. And Secret Service agent John Marshall to the House Select Committee said, for all we know, there was, Secret Service agent could have been involved in this conspiracy. That's pretty amazing coming from the head of the Miami office, who frequently guarded Kennedy and had frequent contact with Floyd Boring because those two served in the Pennsylvania State Police. And again, going back a little bit, the interesting time we talked about Emory Rogers, talked about Bill Greer, a little bit more of Floyd Boring, who, even though he was not physically present, he was the agent in charge of the planning of the Texas trip. He was adamant to me that Kennedy had nothing to do with ordering the agents of the car and that. He was always a very nice man, but it's like, Floyd Boring saying to myself, do you realize you were the one who was usually fingered as the source of Kennedy supposedly in Tampa turning around and saying, get those Ivy League charlatans off the back of the car? Floyd Boring and several other agents were adamant to me that never happened. In fact, Sam Gibbons, Congressman Sam Gibbons, who rode with Kennedy just a foot away in Tampa, he said, oh no, those agents were on the back of the car the whole time. And Kennedy didn't say anything. He was happy during a trip. There was no order, no nothing. But again, you have to contact these people. A lot of them are dead now. Thank God I did. Thank I got them on audio tape and or in correspondence, because who would believe little old me? I got this in books now. And I stoked the fires enough to have Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill come out, scare them out of the wilderness to write their books, because it's a big issue. Because whether there's a conspiracy or not, if these men would have done their normal, thorough jobs, Kennedy lives. That's not Monday morning quarterback. I'm serious. I'm deadly serious. Whether conspiracy or no conspiracy, these men would have done their normal jobs. It'd be like the Reagan assassination attempt, or the attempt on Truman, or the attempt on President-elect FDR. It would have been maybe an attempt, but it would have been foiled, because it would have been building rooftops smarter. They would have saw a gunman or gunmen in the book depository, Oswald or anybody else. I don't believe it was Oswald, but just for the people out there might think, I think it was Oswald. All right, have your little Oswald. They would have saw us at hey, there's somebody in the window. They would have shot him dead, or that would have been it for the motorcade, going forward from that point. Men would have been in the back of the car, or given the opportunity to run close to or be, near the car, that whole thing. And again, I'll just, in the interest of time, just throw in this thing about, they were going highway speed. They weren't going highway speed on Elm Street. They were going 11 miles per hour or less. That's like the speed of pulling out of a parking space. In fact, Clint Hill for decades said, it was my fault. If only I would have been there a second sooner. Now he's changed his tune since 2012. Hey, Kennedy didn't want us there. Hey, what can you do? But up to that point, he harbored a lot of guilt. Now his conscience is so clean, he could smile and laugh and ride in an open car on Elm Street for an Australian version of 60 Minutes. He's making millions through his books. Yes, that's no hyperbole. All his books with his now wife, Lisa McCoven, born after the assassination like myself. They're married now. But anyway, and she went to the prom with Gerald Blaine's son, in Clint Hill's sons are older than her, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, now he's raking in the bucks and going around the world. Oh, he's got tons of blood money. I mean, profits from his books. And there's talk about a movie based on Mrs. Kennedy and Me. And there's going to be a section of the movie where some ham-fisted actor is going to say, hey, get the men off the car. And the sad thing is there's going to be people out there who are going to believe it. They're going to say Kennedy was reckless in his security. I still get people every once in a while, until they're indoctrinated and they see the videos and read my books and whatnot. Every once in a while, I still get people who say, I don't think Kennedy wanted these men by the car. And it's a myth that's out there. I've done a decent amount to erode it on a grassroots level, but it's sad. It's out there. It's just something we have to deal with. So, that's basically all I had. So I just wanted to thank you for your time. If you have any questions or anything, let me know. Thanks.
I got a question, Vince.
Questions we have time for about one question. Are you still there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Hey, Vince.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you.
Question is, we all know the windows and the rooftops weren't open in Dealey Plaza, but what about the rest of the parade route? We can't see the videos of windows and tops being on there. And second quick question, what is the role of the lead car? Were they supposed to let agents know that, hey, windows are open, get those men to shut them? What's the role of the lead car?
Yeah, the lead car is basically there literally to lead the limousine, because oftentimes, believe it or not, Bill Greer even testified the Warren Commission that he didn't know the exact route to take in Dallas. He was at the mercy of the lead car with Sheriff Decker and Forrest Sorrells, two guys I'm suspicious of. He was just following. He's sitting there following the car in front of him. So it was the small answer would be to guide a limousine. But you're absolutely right. When Lawson testified to the Warren Commission, he was really shocked and upset. They got to Dealey Plaza, and there's spectators all over the overpass. And the previous overpasses, there weren't any other than police. And he's motioning the police officers in vain to get these men off the overpass when the shooting began. So it's mainly about overpasses. And a shame of it is it was a closed sedan. It wasn't an open car for the lead car. If ever there should have been an open car, it should have been the lead car, because with the closed sedan, they themselves really couldn't see too far up either. Just to quickly, yeah, a lot of the windows were shut. I'd say like, I'd say 80 to 90% of the windows were shut. But there was a fair amount open too on those skyscrapers and whatnot when they were passing, especially through Main Street. Now, before anybody says anything, now a lot of these other motorcades in the past, yes, there was a smattering of windows open too on those motorcades, but what they had was either the building rooftops being guarded. I didn't get into this, but there was actually incidents, like a half a dozen instances I could find, where a police helicopter was used, not only in San Antonio, but Duluth in September, on the Germany trip and a trip to New York. There's a police helicopter hovering closely behind the actual limousine. So they would have been there to guard building rooftops and windows as well. So, yeah.
Hey, Vince, Andy Keel here.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. I have a question to you about November 4th, when Gerald Bain actually stated that we would never go to the trademark. And then, of course, he's going to be removed for his first vacation. Do you have any more comment or information on that?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, that's in my first book about the motorcade planning and whatnot. Yeah, when Gerald Bain, he was, executive session for the House Select Committee, because even though he wasn't physically there, and he was scheduled to go on his first full vacation during the JFK days. Yeah, he was said to Jerry Bruno, who was the Democratic National Committee advancement, we're never going to go to the trademark. We're never going to go there. And yet, I guess because Gerald Bain is put out of the loop and Floyd Bourne is a plan of the Texas trip, everything changes and they're going to the trademark after all, even though the women's building was a much better place to go, for the president, more seating, this, that, and the other. And it was unsightly with the balconies and whatnot. Well, they overruled the common sense, and Gerald Bain saying that, and they did what they did. And one of the cogs in the wheel was Forrest Sorrells. Forrest Sorrells just gave the directive that we're going to go to the trademark, and he basically overruled someone who had a lot more authority, which is Gerald Bain. But it's all because things are compartmentalized or disconnected. Take your pick. And Gerald Bain's no longer in the loop. Floyd Boring is, and Forrest Sorrells is actually physically there in Dallas. And what the women's building was preferred. And again, if they would have took the women's building, they would have went through Main Street instead of the jog to Houston and Elm, further away, faster rate of speed. Women's building was a better building, but they just chose, you read into it, but yeah, that's what they did. Definitely. It was out of the loop for a lot of these people. Yep. Yeah.
We have time for one more. We got Ed Tedrow here.
Hey, Ed, how you doing?
Hi, Vince. I don't have a question. I just, Rick Russo has been trying to contact you. He's doing serious, important work on medical aspects of the case. And I think he sent you an email, and I think he's called you, and he hasn't been able to get a hold of you. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, my Yahoo mail has been corrupted. I've had other people say it. I don't know. Sometimes I'm getting my messages. I'll have to clean that up and check that out. All right, I'll tell him I'll get back to him. Thanks, man.
Rick Russo. Okay, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give it up, if you would, please, to Vince Palamara.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Great presentation, Vince. Really enjoyed it. Okay.
Appreciate it.